heard, I'm not sure this is actual factual or not, that Laura Trugger said that running a plumbing and heating company is undoubtedly one of the hardest businesses to run. I'm not so sure how true that is, but that's what I have heard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Lord Alan Sugar has said that. He possibly has, yeah. But, you know, I would certainly say that. It's, without, and more specifically, gas engineering, I think it's got some good stuff, some excellent stuff associated to it, but there's a couple of things that make it so challenging to deal with. There's a high level of skill when it comes to recruitment. There's relatively low margin in terms of the work that you do. It's a transactional nature, so typically you're not installing people's boilers for them every single year, for example. The regulations involved are crazy. The cash flow can be exceptional and positive, but it's a challenging business. And I think that there's major issues within the workforce within that industry, more broadly outside of just plumbing and heating, but all trade. I think there's major issues. It's been neglected for far too long. Central government hasn't supported it in any way that it should have been supported. Grassroots skill development is not happening. There's major issues, and it makes it really, really difficult to run those type of businesses.
And fundamentally, property, the industry of construction is probably one of the most important out there.
In fact, it's the most important in terms of GDP. Gross domestic product. It's the largest industry in the United Kingdom, and pretty much I think in most countries, construction tops the leaderboard in terms of in terms of industry. So, you know, that goes to show that it's one of the biggest contributors to the economy, but it's had so much sucked out of it and lack of support. You can't go to university, for example, and you know, I could go to university and get a student loan that's backed by the government and guaranteed to do contemporary dance, but I can't go to university and get a student loan to learn how to become a qualified gas engineer or plumber, and that I find is completely ridiculous. I mean, it's an absolute necessity for this skill set, and it's not something that can be replaced with AI either.
No.
Which is not to be true. Which isn't to be said for accountancy, for solicitors, for a lot of white collar professions out there. The trades are going to prop up and do prop up this entire economy, and they've been neglected. And that's why I think the Trade Mastermind has been as successful as it has been, because it is providing that support, that much needed support to the industry that has been lacking for so long.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I kind of think that, you know, like you've just hit the nail on the head. You know, like you've got people out there that are willing to learn a trade, but say they're in the 20s, we can't physically afford them because people don't realise that might cost us £35,000 to get them through the 4 years with no profit. As soon as they're qualified, now we've got living wage at the minute, and you hit the bang right on the nail. And this isn't just our industry, this is probably them all, is the fact that if you're giving X amount out and you've got low margins, there is no incentive to you to carry on. So I think the government possibly want to look at things like that. If they want people to get into industry and trade, one, let's get a better training, invest into that, because there's a lot of training out there that isn't great. There's nothing, certainly what you're doing, and it's not recognised yet. It possibly will get recognised, but I do think they need to look at what I think would be good if, for instance, say I want to take a member of staff on. I know a company, but we can't afford them because of their age. Rather than, you know, this person having to do something they don't want, like give them an incentive where if I pay them, say, £450 and then the government puts something towards it, that would surely be much more beneficial for the future, because they will get that money back from that person eventually, but they just don't do anything like that. And like you said, I think it's probably because the people in government don't really see it. They just see things black and white. To be honest with you, a lot of them don't really understand how really hard it is to run a business, because there's lots of challenges. I mean, you know what they all are. So you've got employers' contribution, which is a lot of money, which a company, especially if they're doing domestic work and they're doing it for private companies or private people, not B2B, B2C, that's difficult because ultimately they're having to pay for that and then pay for pensions and then add VAT on it. And especially in the domestic market, and I don't know if you agree or not, VAT is a massive hindrance because ultimately there's lots of people that are not VAT registered, and ultimately for you to become competitive with the majority of industry out there, which are your one-man band installers, I think something's quite a massive amount of, I couldn't tell you exactly, but they're going in and they've got this notion of 500 or 600 quid on top, and as long as they get the money, half of them are not paying tax and VAT, because if they did, they wouldn't make any money. And I think the government just let them do that just so that they don't end up not, on the dole or unemployed. I might be completely wrong here. It's just my opinion on things of what I've learned. And I think the VAT especially is just basically saying to, whatever agency is just basically saying, because people say, VAT, it's not your money, but actually it is, because ultimately the VAT man doesn't realise, or the system doesn't recognise that I've got to reduce my profit, not put more profit on, because the consumer caps the market. And that's why the margins, in my opinion, are so low, because ultimately the consumer...
I think tax is it's
not evolved, has it, with the current market?
Yeah, tax is a whole beast on its own. In truth, to try to tackle with, I do see VAT as one of those major barrier to entry points. I think, and I see it often. The psychology of trade business owners is often small ones that they want to avoid going over that VAT barrier, because of some of the reasons that you said, because there's a perception and price increase and all of the rest of it, and have to charge more to maintain the same level of margin, which is true. It's often not considered that you also save VAT on your purchases as well. Mm-hmm.
I think I worked it out about 12.5% actually. Once you talk
in real terms, it's closer to that than it is, the flat 20% increase that a lot of people think that it is. But either way, it's still a price increase that you have to pass on to the customer for you to maintain the same level of profit. And that is a barrier to entry. There's no doubt, there's people doing all that they can to avoid going over that threshold. And what does that say about the country? Like, that we are cutting people down and removing their ambition to do better than what they can, because we're just going to take the money from them. And that's not
being penalised for success.
Yeah, which is entirely backward. And that's one element of the whole issues around central government and tax and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, don't get me into this, because I'll speak for an entire other podcast around this type of stuff.
Yeah. So do you know what? I've even forgot where we stopped. I don't know how I got on that rant, but yeah, it's because I see it, and I see it at a level, and I see a lot of people asking that question. I think just to cap this now, I think the best way the government could do is say it applies to everybody. Simple as that.
There's lots of theory. I mean, unfortunately, MPs are people that are skilled at presenting and getting votes for, as opposed to business people that know how to, correctly run a business. And what bigger business is there than running a country, right? It's all about revenue and expenses. You
can only imagine, can't you? So I've digressed a little bit there. Your podcast was supposed to be all about you,
and now we're bashing the government. Sorry.
Yeah, but that was probably going to happen between us two, because we are very different characters. And just to let everybody know, I haven't really scripted this. This has been, most of the stuff I do is off the cuff, because I do believe that it being more natural and not having something obviously I have a structure in my head, but not, it evolves, doesn't it? Because we was talking this morning about what we're going to talk and this, that, but ultimately it evolves. So just a little bit more about the trade mastermind. So we've set up the trade mastermind now. It's now running. So I've seen this evolve, stupidly evolve, ridiculously evolved. And I was quite shocked and surprised how many people turn up to the events. And, it's quite, alarming. And someone once said to me, are you not bothered, Mick, that ultimately there's all these people coming on learning that it's going to make your industry worse? I said, well, it might have an effect at the beginning. I said, but ultimately, as people get more and more better, there will only be a percentage of people that have got balls to do this, because it still takes balls even after training. But ultimately, for some people, it's not for some, but it's certainly not for the faint-hearted. So ultimately, you're better off being on the curve now before, get ahead of the curve. And that's what I decided.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's the right move. Obviously, it comes from a biased position, because I'm interested in getting clients. But the way that I would look at it is that there will always be competition in whatever industry it is that you enter into. And there's a few ways of unboxing this. Number one is, in my opinion, that a rising tide raises all ships. And that's actually a quote that a client, I won't mention his name because he might not want it mentioning on the podcast, but it's a client that said that to me. And it's a phrase that's rung true, and it's stuck since he said it at one of our academy days. And I believe that to be absolutely true. I think that the industry suffered for way too long on price slashes within the industry, people competing on price and only price, and inevitably having to cut corners in work to do that, to win on price, because there's no profit in it otherwise. I think the industry's been suffered with that for far too long through a lack of education of how to correctly run a business, correctly profit. And we don't teach by any means like how to profiteer. We teach how to run a healthy business where you can reinvest the money into delivering a better service, into the people that you employ, into getting a great customer base. Like, that's what a good business should be. And the point is, you are going to come up against competitors whether you're trained or you aren't. So
you better be trained.
Make sure that you are trained. Don't complain that somebody else might be. Yeah. And there is one guarantee that I can provide, and is that if you do come up against a trade mastermind client and you are untrained, you will lose because of training. It's my business, and it's something that I believe in. I've personally trained, Joe's personally trained. It's something that we sell as a service. But training is at the core of everything. If you want to get better, and
I think as well, being around people of similar minds. When I came along and I joined you guys, I wouldn't say that I necessarily needed you for specific training and stuff, because when I watched the whole sales pitch, it was really similar to what I was. So it confirmed, yes, you're doing this right, yes, you're doing that right. I was doing loads and loads of things wrong. You know what they were, because ultimately the sales side and stuff, I understand that. It was numbers and figures, and actually not realising, what I was making. I had an idea, but it was all in my head. So I learnt quite a lot how important it is to have something there that you can then predict, where I wasn't predicting. I was just going, I know this on all this industry. And you know what?
You were finding out.
Absolutely. There were no where now I can see it, and sometimes I'm like, shit, I don't look at that, but at least I know, it is predictable. And that's one of the key things I learned here. And also it definitely changed my mindset about how things should be. I mean, I wouldn't even be doing the podcast. I did start this a few years ago, obviously fell ill. I do realize that I really like doing this. This is something I enjoy. It's getting guys like yourself onto the show and, picking your experience and learning. So I wouldn't say I'm not necessarily doing it for everybody else. I'm doing it for myself as well, because I'm learning things all the time when speaking to you, picking up little golden nuggets, out of this experience. And I found the whole journey really, really good, and I've really enjoyed it, to be honest with you. And I enjoy it more than plumbing, I think. But I am passionate still about the job. Obviously I am. I've got a company that does really, really well. I would say, Chris, that we was one of the most, first companies that marketed a lot more than other companies, because when I first started, we were spending 50k with Yellow Pages, 19k when I went on this journey to, and we dominated those books. We absolutely dominated those books, and we weren't bothered about profit. You're quite right. We was about legacy, growth, etc. So we was doing in 2008, 2007 was absolutely flying. It was like someone turned a light switch off. So I took some advice, which is, cut your advertising. Big mistake that. You should never cut your advertising. If you're going through hard times, advertise as much as you can physically afford, as long as you're living. That's fine. You don't need to make a profit. We'll get through this. But I took the wrong advice and it didn't work. And you kind of sat there thinking, oh, well, we're not busy. I won't be busy if you stopped advertising. And even the big companies that are out there now are falling that. They're pulling the... And it's crazy, because ultimately, if you no work, in my opinion, now's the time to, if you can afford it, just do as much as you can afford. Don't hold on to your pennies as much as you think you need to. As long as you're not putting yourself in negative equity, just keep doing that. And, we all know there's a cycle and it's going to come back. So if you're on people's minds in 3 or 4 years, then if you're not, you're going to have to start that all again. So one of my ideas when we hit the recession is how do I build a foolproof, if you will, recession-proof business. And it was taking on a lot more of the low tickets, like the home care we offered. I got asked how was that we're doing. We've got thousands, over two, I think I count 2,500. It's not the fact, well, I suppose it is really, but that's just literally on service. And then we have home care, where they pay a subscription, etc. That's something that we did, and we kept hold of that. And you well know, because we looked at this, didn't we, as that's doing, probably 600,000 of the business, and the boiler sales is a higher profit, an easier model to follow. But ultimately we decided to grow that because now we are hitting hard times. We are noticing there's a lot of companies out there that have nothing to do because they just do boilers or they just do one product. So about 2 or 3 years ago I was chatting with Wesley, and Bosch came in and they was talking about air conditioning, etc. So we basically subcontracted that out at the start. We're going big on that at the minute now because I think a lot
Seems
of
to be a emerging market for it.
100% there is, and we're in there. At the end of the day, we're actually getting more lads on training, bringing it more in house, to be honest with you. But ultimately, the products that we offer, we try to stick to heating, which I've kind of the product line. We still do the plumbing side, but that's more on the home care side, and we have designated engineers for it because I think you do have to swap your engineers a little bit around because they get a bit bored, but you do have to kind of keep them a little bit separate. You agree with that. You've got to kind of have lads doing specific roles, but ultimately that side of the business does work, and it does prop up the other side of the business through summer. It actually does, because ultimately there's not as much
negates that bathtub effect of seasonality, doesn't it? Yeah.